Right, it's loading. We should be live soon. All right, everyone, I do believe we are live now. So welcome, everybody. I'll give a couple minutes so that people can start to join on Facebook. But welcome, my name is Cheyenne Raquel Farley, and I coordinate the education and community programs for Garamia Theater. So before we begin, I do want to recognize the Native people whose ancestral lands are where Garamia and Soul Rep produce theater. We wish to acknowledge the land of the Kickapoo, Tabaconi, Wichita, Caddo people, which is now called Dallas. Comanches, Kiowa, have also lived in the region, although it is often not recognized as their homeland. We acknowledge that Dallas is stolen land and that the city was built with stolen labor. I do want to let you all know that this conversation will cover some themes from My Red Hand, My Black Hand by Dale Orlando Smith, which is a co-production with Garamia Theater and Soul Rep Theater. And we'll be discussing some of those themes today, and I do truly hope that you all will purchase tickets to My Red Hand, My Black Hand. It is a phenomenal audio play, and you can do so at garamiatheater.org. Now, since I did mention that this is a co-production with Garamia Theater and Soul Rep Theater, this does mark the return of the Cafe Negro series. And if you'd like to hear a little bit more about the history of that series, please join us on October 28th at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, just as you are today on Facebook. And you can hear a little bit from the founders of that series. So without further ado, I'm really excited to get into this conversation. I want to pass things over to long-term activist and family friend of Garamia Theater, Ernest McMillan.
Oh, thank you, Cheyenne, for setting this all up. I appreciate it very much. I think we're in for a wonderful evening together. We have some very illustrious people, some dedicated souls that's been around a block or two working together for our people. And I just want to take my hat off, salute the coming together of Garamia Theater with Soul Rep. I think it's a very critical and a very noteworthy stage in the struggle that we're in. To see this coming together. And I think this conversation we're having today is going to help foster that kind of spirit. I'm also excited about the fact that this conversation is coming at these times that we're in. It's a time of a lot of anxiety, a time of a lot of confusion and change. And so I hope this will help give some clarity to those who are joining with us today. There's a play following this. It's called My Red Hand, My Black Hand. So I hope that everybody will stay tuned for that. It's a powerful, dramatic portrayal of lives lost and sought to be regained. And so I want to encourage you to stay tuned for that. But today, without any further ado, I want to introduce you to some of our illustrious guests here who are sharing their knowledge and their heartfelt experiences with all of us today. We're going to try to keep it within an hour and a half, and allowing time for conversation from people who may have questions and comments. So feel free to submit that on the chat line. We want to include you in your participation in this discussion. I just basically have 4 questions I'm going to ask each of the panelists to respond to. And I'm trying to go in particular order, if we can keep it kind of sensical and with us working together. So we're going to start it off with Peggy Larney, who is a founder of a powerful organization here in Dallas. It's the American Indian Heritage Day. And she's also a respected tribal member, an elder in her tribe, and also contributed to education of so many children in our city through DISD. She participated in the past with the, I think it's called the American Indian Education Program. So she's been making powerful contributions to our city for many years and many years to come. We'll also be joined by Emma Rogers, who is an entrepreneur extraordinaire, an activist in our community. She's the founder of Black Images Book Bazaar, and she's currently director at the Dallas Civil Rights Center. She's on the advisory board of the Black Writers Association as well. So welcome Emma to our program as well. Joining us additionally will be Jody Voice Yellowfish. She's a powerful activist in our community. She's an ambassador for the American Indian Heritage Day. And she's also has a Master of Arts degree in social work from Haskell Indian Nations University. She's also a member and I think a leader as well in the Indian Citizens Against Racial Exploitation. So welcome, Jody, to our coming together again. And last, certainly, but not least, is Brother Clarence Glover, who is a pastor. He's a graduate of Harvard. He is a former SMU professor and a human rights activist extraordinaire in our city. And I want to welcome this powerful guest who share from the perspective of African American as well as Native American experiences. And I'd like to start off with one question in particular to everyone. So just give you an idea of your context. Could you share with us, beginning with Peggy, what growing up experience or life experience you had in life that kind of helped foster the values and the experiences and the vision and perspectives you have today? It may be some racist encounters or some family opportunities or whatever. But I want each person to just kind of give us some notable parts in their life that help shape who they are today. Peggy, would you mind helping us start? I think you need to unmute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I came to Dallas after graduating from McAllister High School. Then I went to Lawrence, Kansas, to Indian community type of college. And at that time, it was a what they call post-vocation vocation school, commercial school. And I got 2 years certificate in business and came to Dallas to work. At that time, I had a choice of going to any city you want to, because this is at the time where there was the law, 1959 law of adult educational vocational training. And there's a special segment that was for American Indians. There's a couple of reasons why that was in existence. One, there was a report that was made why the Indians needed help because of the poverty level that was showing up of the Indians living in reservations. And the other one is that because the United States government was going through a period of what was good, they were calling self-determination, trying to do away with the Indian tribes. If they could do away with the Indian tribes, that made us be not made our tribe of people not be accountable to the treaty nation that the United States has had with each nation. So there was an underlying reason why this act came, and there's a push for us. But of course, us Indians didn't know that. And so my choice, I came to Dallas since I was closest to home, and I had only my father living close to me. But up to that time, I had no indication of racial healings or anything. We lived kind of in the poor area. We had a Black family that lived next to us. And we had Indian families to live to us. I was kind of raised with Blacks around us, that not that many, because I also lived during the segregation time when there's separation of Black and white. And I remember that I was taking piano, and I was a pianist for a soloist, Black's young. She was going to graduate, and she was going to do her recital. And I was her pianist. We practiced all year. Then at the last minute, she pulled out. And I've often wondered why she pulled out. I think now maybe I know why, but at that time I had no inkling. But coming to Dallas, I still had no more education into racial discrimination, except I knew that there's a difference between us Indians and white. I was kindly raised, be careful being Indians, and that we weren't treated the same. But further than that, my education came as probably 10 years later. In the meantime, with my Indian community, I was going into little meetings that we were having, because this was the beginning of the Dallas Indian community. And then later on, through my church, the United Methodist Church, I think my first step into racial experience in visibility was the anti-racism group that we'd had national at the regional United Methodist conference here in North Texas. And we experienced and saw a lot of even the ministers being very resistant to this. So that's my short answer to your answer to
Well,
your question.
what a valuable insight. I'm going to come back to some of those terms you used about self-determination. Sound like they was twisted how they use that, but we'll come back to those things. Emma, could you share some of your, I guess, pivotal or important, noteworthy experiences that kind of led you to where you are today?
Yes, I can recall when Emmett Till was murdered, kidnapped and then murdered. I was 10, just before my 11th birthday. And I recall the picture of him on the cover of Jet magazine because his mother wanted to show man's inhumanity to man by having his coffin open. And I remember that event. So that happened in 1955. And then when I was a freshman at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1962-63, well, there were protest marches. And of course, we would go and protest, and they would lure us to different meetings. Well, Dr. King's going to be there. And so we'd go to the church meetings, but he was not there. You know, there were other people speaking. And then I was part of the team that was called Hit and Run. And my daughter said it should be called Sit and Run, because we would go to the hotels and sit down and ask to be served. And our goal was to stay there. But if they told us they couldn't serve us, we would stay there. But if the police came and they told us that in front of the police, we would leave. And then we would go to different diners and what have you. And I can remember the police coming in to tell us to leave, and then they would close the business. And then I had a great instructor at Spelman, Dr. Lynn, and then I observed Howard Zinn there. I didn't have any classes from him, but I was in a special class, and he just really introduced us to history and what have you. And so that was a lasting experience. But I was born in Niagara Falls, and I moved to Texas when I was 10. And I remember this just like it happened yesterday. We were in Sears and Roebuck on Main Street in Houston. And I said, I want to go get some water. So my mother said, and I ran over to the water fountain, but it was a white water fountain. And my mother said, and then the sales lady looked at my mother, and the sales lady didn't say anything, but I remember that just like it happened yesterday. So those kind of degradation, you know, that blacks and whites couldn't drink out of the same water fountain. So that my experience as a child, remembering Emmett Till, and then my experience at Spelman, 62, 63, and then in 1968. And today, by the way, October 16th, is when Tommy Smith and John Carlos made that stand at the Olympics. So, you know, I had just had a son in 68, so I'm home watching television. So all of these things have a lasting impression on me. And so they stood there on the podium so they were before Colin Kaepernick. So they stood there on the podium with a black glove fist raised, black socks on, and no shoes, to show how blacks are the social injustice of blacks, police brutality, and what have you in the United States. So they were the precursor to Colin Kaepernick. So those kind of things. I just had my son was born in 68. So I was there watching and seeing what was happening and all the social unrest that was going on in the country because of the lifestyle that the second class citizenship that African Americans were experiencing.
Oh, awesome, powerful stuff. Hey, Jody, could you share some of your maybe life altering or eye opening experiences coming through where you are today? You need to unmute.
There I am. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
You're good. You're good now.
Okay,
We hear you. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess some of the things that are coming to mind that, dealing with race in my own life that kind of, guided me to where I am today and how I'm active within my community and the city. And I think one of the first things I kind of noticed or that comes to mind is always feeling like I was alone. If I didn't have my sibling in the same school with me, there were plenty of times where I didn't know anyone else that was American Indian. And that that really shapes like how you present yourself and how you carry yourself through your everyday existing. You know, your existence is shaped because of that feeling of being alone often. You know, that was basically my entire school career. I really, I can't tell you a friend that I had that was American Indian going through school. Or it was very far or few and far in between. But also, going through school as well, things that stand out to me are seeing history books where your tribes are highlighted, and the teachers can't say the tribes right or the names right, and you can. But when you correct them or say, like in your I would be excited to share about, this is the way you say, that's my tribe, no, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not the way it's said. I'm looking at it's not right. Things like that are what, like, I was like, wait, I know this. I can remember being in elementary school and being like, I know this. My parents have taught me how to say these words and who I am. And, I ran into that so much, in my, going through school and with school as well, mascots and the imagery associated with that has always, just even as a very young child, I knew it was wrong. I didn't have the words, but I had the feelings that it was wrong. So as I got older, and, thank you to people like Peggy in our community, especially with her position within education in our city, we had that person that, was okay with saying it is wrong, and being supportive of saying you can say it's wrong. And I think, that was, the whole mascot issue within the DISD was something that really kind of shaped my life to be just more active. I don't think if I didn't have that opportunity to speak about my issues with mascot issues, I don't think I would still be speaking on. I mean, and it still is an issue, like Peggy mentioned. There are still these fights going on, but I think those are a few of the things that really stand out to me. There are a few times in my life where I had, some issues with violence. Myself and loved ones, we were in a fight with bikers in Deep Ellum because they thought we were Mexican. And that was just, by looking at us. And those were, that was the word they used that was supposed to hurt us by calling us that. And it's like, and that's just going by how we looked, and it was, and everybody can say, people would say like, you shouldn't have been there. You were probably partying. Like, no, it was evening, wasn't late, totally sober. These things still happen. There doesn't have to be excuses for violence or racism. It is what it is. So I think all of the things in my childhood led me to be able to talk about violence and issues like that very straightforward and blunt, I guess. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. All those hurtful images throughout your life and the trauma that is associated with that, and see you transform and transcend those things. I want to learn your secret. So, thank you. Reverend Dr. Clarence Glover, please, can you step forward and let us know something about those life-altering experiences you may have faced or endured in your life's journey?
Well, Ernest, I appreciate the opportunity to share tonight, because my story is a bit different in that I grew up in a community called Cooper Road, Louisiana. My mother and father were educators, and so we were never integrated. We were a former plantation that African-American men and women that established, and they came in this area in Caddo Parish in Louisiana, Caddo. And they were able to build a community, a water district, sewage board, all these types of things. So I grew up with a real sense of identity and community pride. And we only engaged whites, particularly when we went to the city. We had jitneys, we had our own little cab company, if you will, that would take us around and drop us off in the city and bring us back to our Cooper Road. But I was born in the Confederate Memorial Hospital. in Caddo Parish. I was raised in the town of Dixie in the Northwest Louisiana cotton field and plantation country. My ancestors had been born on plantation. So I grew up in that area and I saw the picking of cotton and raising of food of animals for quite a while, particularly after years, the civil rights era during that time, seeing men and women still working in the cotton fields. So that was the time. But also my father was from Memphis, Tennessee. And so moving forward, we would go back and forth, and my aunt and relatives were activists in the civil rights movement in Memphis. So after Dr. King was assassinated, my father took me to the Lorraine Motel, where I was able to go and sit on the bed where Dr. King had been before he was assassinated, before they turned it into a museum. And I remember that so vividly because the gentleman who was there gave me a Polaroid picture that he had taken of Dr. King in the casket, and I still have it to this day. So those types of experiences, and he talked to me about them. But then moving forward, of course, seeing the issues of not being able to go into different places and going back and forth between Memphis and Louisiana at that time, that was a part of my experience in terms of restaurants and stores, etc. And then later on, I went to Grambling State University, graduated, and came to Perkins School of Theology here. And in 1979, went to the King Center and began working there, not working, but speaking at first in Atlanta in Sisters Chapel at Spelman, where Mrs. King was. And this is where I met James Bevel, John Lewis. I met Dr. Bernard Lafayette, C.T. Vivian, Dorothy Cotton. They became mentors of mine, and they mentored me. And then when I got the job and position at SMU as the advisor to black students, and later on teaching and administrating, what I was really doing, I was really going back and forth between the King Center and Atlanta, using these strategies for nonviolent social change, even with Etta Collins, when she was shot here in Dallas, and the reform of police and the testimony before the congressional hearing and the deadly force policies that we were able to do there and get rid of here in Dallas, the chokehold we got rid of. So that was part of my experience then. Then in '86, Mrs. King, I was asked to come and be the interviewer and consultant for Dr. King's first national holiday in remembrance of Martin, which can be purchased through PBS now. So for me, my journey has been one of young African-American male, not with a poor story. And I always say this because there are many young African-American men, like Dr. King, we don't have our poor story where we were beaten down and so forth, in jail. But as a minister, we embrace the social gospel. We embrace intellectual militancy and the world beloved community, and taking the concept of scripture says, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so, but yet understanding that the color of our skin still had an impact on us in spite of our academic and intellectual acquisitions, you see. So trying to use those tools over the years to implement social change has been a part of my work. Bishop Joseph Johnson, who was my spiritual father, who was the first African-American to graduate from Vanderbilt and established what's called Black Christian theology, along with James Cone and Black theology. So that's where my life has been centered. And so now the work I continue to do with First African Freedom Church. And just within this week, we've established now, as I said earlier, the first, I paid for it the other day, on May 4th of every year from now on will be National African American Cotton Pickers Day, which will recognize the African men and women who were brought here to this land to ultimately pick in slavery, but later on pick cotton, which became the major economic foundation for America.
Wow, thank you so much. Just listening to you and others is a testament to resilience, to perseverance in the face of so much trauma. And I'm learning in a more deeper way even today that the trauma we're dealing with is a collective trauma, intergenerational trauma that's been passed down from our ancestors to us today. It's in our DNA, this experience of trauma, hurt, land stolen, lives lost. It's a part of us, and it's in our hearts, and it's carried to us by us today. And I'm wondering if we can start again, going back around with Peggy to talk about how do you see people dealing with this trauma today? What are you seeing? Are people facing it? Are they hiding from it? Are they denying it? Are they stepping up to it or coping with it? And what would you recommend in terms of healing if there's such a thing that we need to be facing today? So I'm going to ask that question to each of you, if you don't mind, to just look at this collective trauma that we experience as Black and Indigenous people, especially in this country, and just talk about how you see people coping or dealing with or denying it or facing it or being healed by it at all today. Is there kind of like I guess you say, a status check on that situation with your people and our people today? I need you to go to unmute. Thank you.
With the general audience of United States today, I think finally there's a little awakening. After that, this point, it was hiding everything. And maybe we didn't have to deal with it, so didn't know. And with so many racial healing organizations out here of all different colors, sure, we should be addressing everything now, and people should be awakening. I think we see that as a movement. But up until just recently, nobody really cared. There are some of us, and we were crying about, what the plights are, but nobody was listening. Especially with American Indians, we're so small in numbers and we're so small in visibility that our plight has never been heard. But the only thing that I need to bring out at this time is that American Indians, because of color of skin, we could be in the classification of people of color. But on the other hand, we're not in the same grouping because we're a sovereign nations. Each of us from a sovereign nation that has to deal with the United States government for our existence. Sure, the other people, colored people, fighting the United States government for survival, but it's different with us because ours is with treaty. The United States government doesn't want to deal with and honor the treaties. And so they have done everything that we've heard. Genocide. You mentioned genocide, trauma, intergenerational. Our people have experienced it just as much as your people have, but not many people know about our plight. And they're never going to know because we've had some major 2-3 years ago of events coming up, and only way we knew about it was because of thanks to the modern technology of social platform that we at Indian across the United States was able to honor the existence of our brothers and sisters, and especially like on the Sioux, the Lakotas, when they were going through the water situation. Our people were able to go up there, and that's just Indian tribal people from the United States was able to go up there. They had a chance for another civil rights movement. Of course, the Indians were involved with original civil rights movement and everything was going, but it was called AIM. And they made a little exposure, but not enough. And the younger generation have had not the opportunity to do so. So this was an opportunity, but it was not visible within the United States. We're the inhabitants of the United States. We call ourselves indigenous because we are the original inhabitants of the United States, but that's where the indigenous definition kind of stops for us. But with the visibility of our tribe, we're even, we get asked in Dallas, I didn't know Indians still lived. And that's why I always say I'm a full-blood American Indian, because us full-bloods are quickly diminishing. Our tribal speakers are dying out quickly. People are doing their best to do away with our culture and with our heritage. And so that's kind of a quick answer to your question.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Emma, do you remember my question? Are you prepared to respond?
Why don't you repeat it?
I know it's kind of razzle dazzle question too. Basically, recognizing that the trauma we're addressing today among Black and Indigenous people has been intergenerational and been hurtful and trauma, external violence, land stolen and all. I'm saying, how do you see people responding to that today among our people? Are we burying it? Are we hiding it? Are we concealing it? Are we facing it? Is there movement doing it? I think Peggy spoke to how the American government responded. But I also like to hear about how people responded as well. So if you could just talk about what opportunities may be for healing or moving forward, whatever you see in that area, we can go with whatever you say.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna see if I can address it.
Okay.
Well, the main thing I think is that we need to vote. Okay.
Okay.
Because we have been, and there's so many things that try to disenfranchise of it. We need to vote. And once we elect people, we need to go and hold them accountable. And then we need to work in our community. Because like right now, I'm not liking the advertisements I'm hearing, these political ads. So-and-so wants to defund the police. But the other, I always add to it, they want to defund the police and put the resources in social services so that they can help help people in the communities. Because you don't need to call the police because you see your neighbor doing something strange. That's something that a social worker or somebody else, a counselor or somebody else could handle. So we need to have those resources directed that way. And then we have so many disparities in our community with healthcare, the criminal justice system, the education and housing. So we need to address all those issues to help our, community. And to have, and especially our educational system, because like right now, with students going back to school or homeschooling or electing to have their classes electronically on the internet. Well, like in my neighborhood, we don't have good internet connection. And they're finding this all over in poor neighborhoods, in Black neighborhoods. And so therefore, in some places, they have re-engineered the school buses where people can go near the school bus and get a connection. So those are, all of these kind of things make our community disgusted, but we still have to persevere and try to get these things changed for our community so that we won't continue with some of the ills of the community. For example, if in order to escape, if you use drugs consistently where it impairs you, or alcohol where it impairs you, well, then you do that, you model that behavior, and then your children may model it, or your children may not because they saw what it did to you. So these are just some of the things I think that we have to address so that our mental health status can be improved. Because if you have poor internet connection, you have the city doesn't provide all the services that in your neighborhood that it does in other neighborhoods. Some people get disgusted and give up, but some people fight. And that's why I think the people on the Zoom tonight are, all activists and involved in our community to try to make things better.
Thank you, Emma. Jody, what are you saying our people, your people, how responding to this intergenerational collective trauma? How are you seeing it from your perspective?
How I see it is, it's definitely that pain and that trauma, that historical pain, or just the generation back. It's real. It really affects and shapes people's existence, even today. It's very much there, and I feel like Peggy mentioned, it's been there and it doesn't always, or it hasn't, I guess, historically been, highlighted the same as um, other groups of people have been spotlighted in different ways. It's kind of like, there was kind of this renaissance of sorts, this change of how we began to share and tell about our pain and our traumas. And I think within that different framing and that different scope of how we shared about ourselves, was kind of healing within itself. There's within the American Indian communities, there's these romanticized versions of who we are and what people want us to be. And it's always to highlight the pain. It's always to highlight, the traumas that we faced and the separations we faced and boarding school and genocide. And we know these things happen, but people don't really talk about how that affected the existence of the people after, because these things didn't really stop. The violence that was used to steal land and to rape the land and things like that have direct correlation and direct impact on the violence our people face. And those are things that we're still combating in different ways. And I think, having the space to organize and educate is healing within itself. And I think there's finally space in our communities where we're not having to just pander and talk about the pain. We're able to share successes and victories and talk about contemporary issues that are positive. Even with, there's ways that people are organizing around the environment that directly impacts changing violence that we face. So I think, in short, that pain is really real, but there is a change. And I think that change is healing within itself. That I can kind of foresee that the generation coming up is dealing with totally different pains. It's not this continued timeline, this continued cycle of the same pain that came from genocide and boarding schools and separation. It's a different change. When the environment changes, everything with it changes. And I think that's the same with the pain and healing as well.
And Jody, I just want to commend you for the work you and others have done with youth today, especially with Young Leaders Strong City. Have you been able to carry that message of organizing and educating our young people and passing that torch on? So thank you. Dr. Glover, can you respond to how you see African-American people responding today to this intergenerational traumatic experience?
Well, Brother Ernest, I'd like to add to that another dimension. Certainly we have the intergenerational trauma, but also I like to look at it from the perspective of intergenerational triumph, because certainly we recognize that our movement from Africa, from the continent to America has been a traumatic one. But in the process of that, our being here tonight is also a tribute to all the victories that were fought and won during this period of time in the midst of this trauma. And I believe it's, as they say, if something doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger, if you will. And certainly hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, but also hundreds of thousands have survived. And because of the survival, we're here tonight. I've worked with the American Indian community here in Dallas. Peggy and I worked at the school district together, and all my life, coming from Caddo Parish, conscious of my parish, my Caddo, the Native American experience there. I always had an interest in wanting to know more about the African community. Who are we? We say this term. When I came to Dallas and DISD, we had the term Black students. I was at SMU, but we changed it to African American and began to focus on the identity of Africa. We also know that long before the Civil Rights Movement during the early days in America, they knew they were Africans. Richard Allen, the Free African Society, African Methodist Episcopal Churches. And I say this because to talk about stolen people and stolen land and stolen people, we must also look at ourselves as who are we as a people? And as we begin to identify ourselves not as Negroes or just coloreds or just black, but rather as people who come from the west coast of Africa, that land. Where's that land? West Africa. What part of West Africa? From Ghana, from Togo, from Nigeria. Who are we? We are Wolof, we are Yoruba, we are Mandinka, we are Fulani. I think it's important, just as I've been able to see with many of my brothers and sisters of indigenous cultures and others, who they are. And I believe this is what we must continue to do, not just in a symbolic way, but rather in a very strategic way. And I see that in over the years of 30-some years in Dallas, we talk about Africa, Pan-Africanism and so forth, but we fail to connect with our brothers and sisters from the continent who are here. But that's a part of the trauma. That's a part of the disconnect. And if we're going to truly make this movement, we must connect with them and them with us, because we have all experienced that trauma, but also understand the triumph, just as Dr. King and the president of Ghana understood at the time, because when Dr. King left and went to the liberation of Ghana back then, they celebrate that. You can go to the internet now and pull up Dr. King's message about the birth of a new nation. So he understood his connection with Ghana at that time, which gave support to the civil rights movement here. So as I think about the trauma, I think about the pain, yes, it is traumatic. It does affect us, it's in our DNA. But also, I submit to you that there are elements that we who are elders and we who are educators and community activists must also remind ourselves in the spirit of Sankofa that we must reach back and fetch what we left behind and understand the victories that we've been able to develop. And as a result of those victories in the civil rights movement, so many other doors are open for so many other people as well. But I think the missing thing in our community is the cultural clarity and groundedness that we need to be building for future generations, because as our world becomes a multicultural world, we must become culturally literate about who we are as a people, both here in this land, but also in our motherland of Africa. And this will be a bridges, because now we know in Ghana, the doors are open, we're going back. My family's in Ghana, those of us who've been back to Ghana and other places, as Emma Rogers and others will do with the young ladies, we work with them. And so we have a sense of who we are. And as we stay here, we build a global community together.
Excellent from everyone. I appreciate everybody's perspective in that. We have a couple of questions already on the chat line, but I want to ask at least one more question before we open up to the chat line. So I want to encourage those persons who have questions to please submit those, and we're going to get to them after this next series of rounds. I'm reading a book now called Begin Again. And I just want to encourage everyone to read it. It's written by Eddie Claude Jr. And it's a powerful book. It's really a research and investigation to the mind of James Baldwin and his writings over the years. And one thing that I stumbled across in this book, well, it was evident and as broad as day, but I stumbled across it and really latched on to this idea about after times. He brought this whole concept of after times to talk about the opportunities this country had to choose the path of justice and equality, but it reverted back to the notion of a white nation. Each time that happened, there was a great victory and then a setback. He mentioned from the founding of this country, the Constitution, where this whole thing about equal rights for all and inalienable rights was discounted, by saying African people have 3/5 of a human life worth, for example. Talked about the Civil War and Reconstruction, where the great advances for Civil War to free the South of slavery was twisted at the short Reconstruction period, and all those things stolen, and African-American people put back into sharecropping and slave positions. He mentioned about the Civil Rights Movement, how the great progress made with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65 were thrown away and cast aside by the destruction of SNCC, the Black Panthers, the assassination of King, Malcolm X. The whole civil rights movement was dismantled. And then we got Reagan was the after times of that, which he launched the laws and started the mass incarceration at another level. Obama was an opportunity for a great opportunity for this country to begin to turn around and face the truth and deal and get rid of the lie that's been living. But now we have Trump as the after times of that. It's reverse it. So my question to you is, what do you see happening next after this election? Are we going to go back to after times of setbacks? Or are we going to be looking at going back to normalcy as before Trump? Are we looking at a time for us to become even more directed toward organizing radical change in this country? What do you see happening after November 3rd election? What do you see this country moving toward? And how can we be involved in something productive? Peggy, could you start us off with that again?
I hate to see what's going to happen the night after the election. One way or the other is going to be very scary. And I think this is time that we need to be prepared on how we're going to have to deal with it. The African American, y'all have a special path that you all stay on for the survival for your people. Us American Indians, we can be on the general path with y'all, or the path, the federal path of our existence, because as I mentioned, we're tribal nations, and that the United States have to deal with this. So I don't know what what Trump might do to our tribal people before election day, because he's always wanted to do away with that because of all of his monies, his investments also into the petroleum, into the companies that are already illegally filtering into the Indian reservations. People cannot understand why the Indian reservation sits with vast land, undeveloped land. It's because sacred rights, tribal nations, sacred sites, that is very, very important to the existence, not only to the tribal people, but to the environment, which affects all of us. And if that's not taken care of, like I said, it's a scary time. And he could do away with that. He's got the presidential pen that he can make us all take away the federal recognition of each tribe. And then we'll be just like everybody else. And we say we're American Indians with no, where the federal government has no responsibility towards us. They don't have to honor the treaty anymore. And so, it's a scary time even before the election. I don't know what will happen after the election. Yeah. That's for the smarter minds to be really working and have it ready to go day one. Yeah. Whether we're there or not, that depends on where the minds are going to be. Thank you.
Let me explore one more point that you raised, Peggy. Despite being a federal recognized sovereign nations, there's been so much trail of broken treaties and misdeeds and forcing people to live on reservations on poor areas of land. Those kind of things happen regardless of that status. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just trying to understand this thing about federal sanction is being some kind of protection, or is it being a shield, or is it just some kind of fake name they throw on the people?
Most of the presidents have been very sensitive to the federal sanctions of various sites and keeping up with the treaties, not to the best abilities, because there's so many factors that comes into the play, but they've done decent job. Okay. But recently it hasn't been. And so, Trump has had various hands into doing, just even currently, into doing away with the recognition of, when the American Indians at the water rights at the South Dakota, our people were being faced with water bullets, with the United States government and federal government and state government and city government, 3 entities right there, when he could have made a difference, but Trump didn't, because he didn't care to.
Yeah.
if the Indians can say, I give up, then that would be to his favor. And of course, he had large the company that was holding that was Energy Transfer, which is headquartered here in Dallas. And the owner is Earl Warrens. We hear that at the park. So it's hard for me to go to that park.
Yeah.
I don't go to the park anymore after I found out it's a beautiful place, but I don't go there anymore. I don't want to honor that.
Yeah.
And so, his money goes so many facets, and that includes all the companies that's against American Indians.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for my mind. Emma, do you have any idea of projections for after the election?
Okay, well, I'm optimistic.
Okay.
I'm optimistic because we have more people voting early than ever before. And I think people want to change. I think that what we need to do after the election, what some people are doing now, we need to organize, and we need to collaborate with other organizations who have similar interests. We are involved in churches and social organizations, sororities and fraternities. We need to work with those organizations to help make our community better. I'm too old to protest. I can't go down and protest. I did that when I was younger, but I can educate the community. I can help provide, participate in a study group, provide literature that will inform you, those kind of things. And, like Bob Marley says, you got to stand up for your rights. We have to go down to City Hall. We need to communicate with our city council person. We need to communicate with our legislators. We need to, whatever we want to stand up for, we need to get with an organized group, collaborate with others who have the same interests that we have, and present a united front. Okay. So I think that we just need to organize, and the other thing that 45 is trying to do, he's trying to take funding away from people who are involved in diversity and equity training. And so, for example, if a hospital, and some of these hospitals, all these organizations have been doing diversity and equity training for years. So that needs to continue because of what the route, the way our country is going now with this police brutality and what have you. People need to be informed how they are being racist. Okay, so we need to work with different groups to identify that. And there's a good book called something about white supremacy, how to become a better ancestor. We need to put that in the hands of people in other ethnic groups, in the white ethnic groups, so that they will know how they are keeping their foot on our neck, in other words, So I say organize.
Thank you, Emma. And though you might not be marching and going to jail and those kind of things, your gifts and talents are essential and needed now more than ever before. Thank you. And now, Jody, can you give us some projections or some ideas about what you see happening next among Black and Indigenous people?
Yeah, it's we're in such crazy times as it is. Either way, like Miss Emma was saying, we're still gonna have to organize. I am cautiously optimistic because of what we're seeing presently, with early voting starting and everything. But either outcome, I'm optimistic in the organizing that I've seen, because especially within our city, I hadn't seen organizing like we've seen in the past year. I haven't been involved in that type of organizing before this presidency, this current president. And there was this, we kind of stuck to ourselves. We took care of our community, and I saw the need to kind of, I don't live on a reservation. I've always lived in the hood, always lived in Oak Cliff, always lived in the city. And like the majority of, American Indians do live in, you know, urban settings. And so once I started once I was comfortable and felt the need to kind of branch out, I think that's when I saw so much more of this, you know, organization, you know, working with organization, and it was so needed. And I feel like it's going to be even more needed after this, because once this presidency ends and whatever the outcome is, you know, we're still in the same fight. We're still in the same situation. We're still fighting for the same lack of, you know, because of the same lack of resources. And, you know, where I'm living, you know, if my neighbor is experiencing the same thing, you know, it's the same shared struggle, the same shared fight with the entire community that I'm in, not just the American Indian community. So that's what I see. I see more organizing, because where this momentum is still going, and this momentum with the organizing currently I've seen has been healing within itself, because these conversations and this education that's coming out of it has been, you know, just such a change. We are having to look to people like Miss Emma and yourself, and, you know, to get these stories of what do we need to do? You know, how should this look? You know, how should, you know, this coalition of people working together that looks totally different and totally different histories, but we have the same need and the same fight. What do we do? How do we go to city hall? How do we do this? And I think that we're just going to see that expand even more. And I think, you know, honestly, you know, it's scary times, but that's a very beautiful thing, in my opinion.
Thank you. And Dr. Glover, take us home, please, with your view on what's happening next.
You started off by Brother Ernie talking about after time. I believe people need to understand what I call the American script, the American play, if you will. This is a script, and a script, if you know, is the same script no matter the characters. And if we understand better the script of America, then we can understand where we are and how to proceed forward. And what I mean by that, when we look at the script of America, as Dr. King described to us, he said America is essentially a dream. It is a dream of a land where men and women of all colors and creeds of nationalities can live together as brothers and sisters. But the essence of this dream is summed up in these words: we hold these truths, be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He goes on. But he said, America, ever since the founding fathers dreamed this dream, America suffered from what psychologists, psychiatrists call a schizophrenic personality, tragically divided against itself. In that context, the American dream is not a dream that was created for poor whites, for African men and women, for indigenous men and women. So we must understand the script, the constitutional reality, as you mentioned, about 3/5 human, particularly as people of African descent, what happened to indigenous people. And as we went through the Civil War and came into Reconstruction, the radical Reconstruction period, the nation took a moment and during the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, put a filibuster on the floor, and they compromised and negotiated, and therein started a 10-year, ended the radical Reconstruction period and 100 years of Jim Crow. And that 100 years of Jim Crow led up to Dr. King's 1968, to Dr. King's in the 60s. Well, when we look at what happened under President Bush, Jr., the second President Bush, we see the same thing happening. We saw a president being selected like Rutherford B. Hayes selected. We see the same thing with Bush. So we need to educate ourselves about the periods of history. So we begin to see that the federal government, which is a critical component to the safety, as Peggy has talked about, of people in this nation, that when federal laws are lifted, because that's at that level, you have protective rights. And when those protective rights are lifted, be there during the period of radical Reconstruction, when the federal troops were removed out the South, or when the federal government lifted its hand here recently after President Bush. And we began to see, even with President, as you mentioned, Reagan, the federal absence in our government. Most recently, as we heard on the debate, where President Trump has packed the judges in the courts, 200 judges from top to bottom, white men. That means we have to educate, we have to become knowledgeable of how this script in America, I'm going back, what is the script of America? And I think so oftentimes we get frustrated because we are expecting something different. And when you have an expectation that says that you have invested your emotions in the hope that someone would do something different, and that's the only way a person can hurt your feelings. But when you understand the script, you understand that there are people who are simply playing out a role. Now, there are European people who have always played a part in our struggle in this country. I always tell people that the Underground Railroad was not a black train. It was European stations, men and women working together, abolitionists, Thaddeus Stevens, George Sumner, even Viola Uzo, there in the Civil Rights Movement, and others who were killed along the way. But my point is that we as people of color, as indigenous people, as African people, we must recognize, we must, as elders today, help this generation understand the script of America and understand how to get involved in such a way as Emma is talking about in terms of voting, but not moving vote and then becoming leaders in the parties, understanding what legislation does, the importance of federal oversight, that voting rights, that we live as an amended people. We talk about a Supreme Court that is a strict constitutionalist, a judge. Then if they look at the Constitution as a strict constitutionalist, then we're not included. So you see, that's why we must have the types of judges and others who understand amendment rights. So with that, I think that we have a great deal to do in that area, but Jody and others, if we help them understand that and really get in there and fight and preserve those federal protections, then be able to change until we are able to write a new constitution.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm hearing organize, educate, and understand. And understanding itself is a transformative act. So I'm appreciative of all the wisdom we have gained today from your insights. We have time for a couple of questions, and I'd like to share those with you from some of our audience members. I can only have time for two. One is a comment by Constance Howard Hargis. She says, although Native American and African Americans have both suffered oppression, suppression, and racial injustice, we come from different cultural backgrounds, and that makes some differences in how we experience racism. And I have a question from Tina Medina. She asks, I have heard the argument from some people say that the land is not stolen, that history occurred and there were winners and losers. Over time, those claims to the land are no longer valid. What do you say to those individuals who think about along those lines? How can we help them understand that it's not the land has been, that it's a thing of winners and losers and we just lost? With Peggy especially, or yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Way before 1492, we had people stepping on our land. And I always say that they were the invaders of our land. Those that start coming over also had the doctrine of discovery behind them. A book from the law from the Catholic that gave them the right, if they went to any land, that they could take it. So here they come into our land. We're already occupying, this is our land, but that's regardless. And so they gave them the right to start our land. Invasions of, and then later on, we have the eminent domain. We had to, because of more people were coming, the federal government that was set up at the time from the people that came over from Europe, saying that we need to protect our people that's coming over. So that started all the stolen land because the land was already occupied. The Indians had a different way of taking care of their land. They're steward of the land. Yeah. And they moved accordingly, environmentally and economic system, because there's lands and grasses and animals to take care of. And we all know from our training, from the almanac calendar, different times of periods and the seasons, this is, you should plant here, you should do this, and you should do that. Well, our people were the originators, all of us. that started this land, and it's those of y'all that came, y'all's family that came that had some little land that they could grow. They knew what to do to take care of the land to grow. The white people that was coming over didn't. Our Indian people had to teach them even how to eat. But guess what? November, it's going to be Thanksgiving time. Going to be pilgrims and Indians. When the Indians were the one that taught the pilgrims how to eat. Then within a year's time, those Indians that had sat down and ate with them, most of them had been either killed off or had been sold off as slaves. So what does that say to the pilgrims' faith? Not very much. But going back to Texas, in 1761, there was a law from the governor to start pushing the Indian tribes away because Indians were fighting back to hold on to their land when they were being invaded, but they didn't look upon that. So they said, well, we got to get rid of the Indians somewhere. They start crying about it. And then the federal government comes in and says, well, get rid of them. We'll have a place for them in Oklahoma. So Texas pushed out all the tribes to Oklahoma, which meant to the white people, the Indians abandoning the land. We didn't abandon. It was our life or not. So our people were forced to move. They didn't have a choice. They were forced. So this is where the stolen land comes when we talk about, especially in Texas, but this is applicable to the whole United States. And so I think then from there we can go to treaties, the well-known names, Tarrant. We have Log Cabin, John Bryant that came and waited. And when lands he bought some land, became big landowner. And now there's cabins saying this is the first dwelling in the Dallas area, which is not true. It should be a teepee or a wigwam because this is cattle's country.
Yeah.
And then, so, that goes on. I could go on and on from there. So just one more thing I wanted to add was that we're also in our heritage, we're pushing to change segment of Trinity River back to its original name, Arkakosa, which is a tribal name from the Caddo. And so we're just beginning on that, but we've got some good support from the city of Dallas. So that may happen eventually. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Ernest,
I think we have about 1 minute left. And, Clarence, you just did it, and then we're going to turn it over to Cheyenne. Give us about 30 seconds to a minute, please.
Yeah. I think she alluded to the religious component. I think we need to understand the whole idea of manifest destiny. So I want the audience to take that term manifest destiny and understand what that meant in terms of European exploration and the whole affirmation of them thinking and believing that God had ordained and destined those individuals at that time to come to this country, to take the land, suppress the people, and then to return to Africa and then bring us over to work the land. So that's a very important term. Again, it's part of the script of America, the term manifest destiny. Thank you.
Thank you. To all our participants today, Dr. Clarence Glover, Sister Peggy Smith, Sister Emma Rogers, Sister Jody Voice Yellowfish, I thank you for sharing your time, your talents, your gifts, and your wisdom with us today. Thank you so much. Cheyenne, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. As somebody who's young and learning a lot too, it's anytime I can hear from elders is just amazing for me. So I really appreciate you all, panelists, and those of you all on Facebook. I will have in the chat the link to purchase tickets for My Red Hand, My Black Hand. So please hop over there and get those tickets. It truly is an amazing audio play that dives into some of the themes that we discussed today. So again, thank you all so much. And I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Peace.
Yucky.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.